As some of you might know already from my community posts and maybe a few screenshots on some of the recent videos, I wrote a book. It's called S79, The Horror in the Swamp. It's about a man named Robert Tolliver, and he gets mugged and dragged out into Louisiana's swampland and placed in an abandoned bunker as a sacrifice to a creature known as S79. Robert tries to fight his way out of the labyrinth-styled structure. He tries to avoid venomous snakes and alligators, and of course the monster. And his ultimate goal is to find his way back to the thugs that mugged him to try to get his revenge. Now the following is a teaser. It's a narration of Chapter 6 out of the audiobook. The audiobook, as of this recording, is not out yet, but I'm hoping it's going to be out within the next week. The book itself can be purchased on Amazon for the Kindle and, of course, paperback edition. The book is 171 pages long, and when the audiobook finally comes out, it'll be over 6 hours in length. I'm going to put links in the comments section and, of course, the description below. And, happy Halloween. Thanks for listening. Chapter 6, S80. The next corridor lay behind a set of double doors. The smell of long, rotten meat and sulfur takes his breath. No vines had invaded the path. Offices lay on the right side of the hallway, and the left was only a blank wall studded with caged bulbs about 7 feet up. There was a light opposite each door. He wished those lights still worked. Only a few would alleviate the darkness, but those were useless wishes. Some of the doors had been ripped off the hinges. The interiors of those rooms were destroyed. The offices had equipment, papers, and even some personal items such as coats, purses, duffels similar to his own, and rats. The rats seemed to multiply the deeper he edged into the hallway. He could hear their squeaking and sometimes caught sight of their tails as rats scurried away from him. One of the office's contents had been destroyed and scattered through the hall. He stepped carefully over and around broken chairs, filing cabinet drawers, pieces of typewriter, and a woman's dress shoe. Farther up the hall, a dark stain stood out starkly against the pale floor. A pair of glasses lay broken and discarded against the wall, the good lens reflecting shards of lantern light. He was reminded briefly of the store attendant, with only one good eye. An ID badge lay in the middle of the hallway at a sharp turn. Robert paused, eyeing the badge. Do I really want to look at it? He wondered. He bent and scooped it up quickly, turned it over, and saw a thumb-sized picture of an older lady with perfectly coiffed, gray hair, deep-set eyes, and enough wrinkles to mark her as well past retirement age. She wore glasses just like the broken ones he had seen on the floor. The badge said her name was Dr. Rosenberg. Under her name it read, Clearance, 1010, Escort, none. Restrictions, none. He had never seen a government-issued badge like that one before. Admittedly, he had seen very few government-issued badges of any kind, but he had seen a few during his time in Chicago. His work had taken him to a low-level branch building that housed a few investigators from the FBI. They had all worn badges, but none like the one that he held. He let the badge fall back to the floor. I don't want to meet the same end as you, Dr. Rosenberg. His voice was barely a whisper. He moved forward until the sickening odor of decay stopped him. Moving to a closed room, he turned the knob and pushed the door. It barely budged, so he put his thigh against it and shoved inward. The rush of cleaner air welcomed him, and he stepped in, pushing the door almost closed. The few minutes of breathable air was refreshing. He could think straighter as he moved back to the hallway. A fat rat scurried around the far wall and continued in the same direction he was headed. "Yeah, you had to get in here somewhere, didn't you?" He aimed his question at the large rodent, who ignored him and kept trotting away. If rats were inside, they had to have gotten in somewhere besides the flooded room full of alligators. He wasn't altogether sure he wanted to see where they were coming in, especially if it was the source of the putrid smell that grew in intensity with every step forward. The debris petered out, and the floor was free of clutter as he continued to follow the fat rat. He could see a few more doors ahead, but the rat disappeared under the swinging doors of the room on the left. Robert stepped past the doors, holding the lantern far out from him, and noted the hallway ended not far ahead. He turned to the doors again and started to push it open cautiously. The familiar sandpaper sound nearly made his heart burst. Spinning to face the hall again, he spotted a big fat snake. His movement had startled the snake, and it coiled. His heart dropped to his knees. He was more terrified of snakes than gators or thieves. Snakes had been his lifelong phobia, much to the chagrin of his macho father. Standing stock still, his brain fetched around for the best way to deal with the situation. The snake remained ready to strike if he moved. Its shadow danced on the wall behind it, looking as large as Robert's thigh. He swallowed nervously and his throat made a little dry clicking sound. The snake turned its head, and Robert could see the shape of its head. It was definitely venomous, but he didn't know what type of snake it was. Cottonmouth was his first guess, but he didn't care to know. He only wanted away from it. He stretched his lantern hand out to the side very slowly, and the snake's head swayed as it watched Robert move. He raised the axe, hoping like hell he wouldn't have to swing it at the snake, and bobbed the lantern to keep its attention fixed. It wasn't his normal practice to go back into rooms, but he couldn't tear his gaze from the huge reptile. No wonder the damn rat darted under the door, he thought, noting the two large bulges near the center of the snake's coil. Thankfully, the door moved easily as his butt made contact. He kept the lantern bobbing gently as he stepped backward. Unfortunately, his foot landed on a dead rat, causing him to roll his ankle and stumble. His lantern hand jostled wildly upward as he fought for balance. The snake struck out at the moving lamp. The jolt nearly knocked it from Robert's grasp. The immense and terrifying weight of the snake hit his side, finishing off his balance, and he sprawled backwards, the snake partially across his body. Without thinking, he shoved the snake off of him and fought to stand, bringing the axe up as the vile creature coiled for another strike. The world ceased to matter. He might be trapped in the building with some military-manufactured monster also ceased to matter. Swinging the axe down with all the force he could muster, he hit the snake as it struck again, catching it a foot below the head. The metal plate at the end of the weapon took the brunt of the force and clanged as it hit concrete. The snake's body writhed crazily, causing the nearly severed portion to flip and flap. The body rolled, twisted, and coiled in a dying frenzy of self-preservation. Robert brought the axe up again, meaning to finish the job, but the thing would not stop moving. As the foot-long portion with the head still attached finally came loose from the body, it rolled to within an inch of his foot, the mouth opening and closing. Startled and disgusted, he brought his heel down on the head, screaming as he did so. He kicked the head into the pile of coils, which reacted by enveloping it. A violent shudder ran through him. He knew the snake was dead, but it kept moving, and that freaked him out, and set a dark pall over his expectations for his escape. With things like that running around in the darkness, ready to take him out without warning, he might not survive long enough to ever see the blue skies of Louisiana again. Darting back to the overturned lantern, he picked it up and held it aloft. The stench of death was viscous in the room. The smell was so strong it burned his sinuses and his eyes. At the back of the room, under a hip-high counter, lay the rotted remains of an alligator. Robert gagged as rats climbed out of its open, decaying mouth. The belly had been ripped open and then guts were strewn a few feet into the room. The carcass sprawled at an awkward angle as if the spine had been broken. The alligator seemed to vibrate as Robert backed up. For one horrible moment, he expected it to move, as the snake had after its head went missing. Instead, a small horde of black, gore-slick rats exited from its gut and scattered in different directions. Bile rose in his throat, choking him, and he fled from the room. Through the door that had stuck open, he could still make out the constant coiling and uncoiling of the snake's body. As the door's weight pulled it loose from whatever it had been stuck on, it swung out into the hall, toward him, and in its wake, that puke-inducing smell of rotten alligator engulfed him. Cursing between dry heaves, he let the axe dangle precariously from his right arm as he moved swiftly down the hall. The dry scraping noise it made as it jangled against the blocks was bad, but he refused to slow down long enough to alter its position. The dry heaves subsided, and his stomach haltingly crawled back down to its normal place. He had forgotten about the twine tied at his back until he heard the chittering noise enter the hallway. He turned and the line pulled taut for a split second, and he panicked, swatting at it, grunting loudly. His overheated brain had assured him another snake was at his back. The other sound varied in intensity, and he couldn't tell how close the creature was. The chittering escalated to a mind-numbing shriek that hurt his head. He ducked into a room as he doused the lantern flame. He shut the door and fumbled with the lock, feeling a bit better as he heard the click. The shriek faded and his ears rang loudly in the ensuing silence. A low whimpering drifted to his ears. It was in the room with him. He looked about in the pitch but saw nothing. It took a few seconds for him to realize the sound was coming from him. Exerting great effort, he choked off the sound and forced his breathing under control. Another truism from his father had been that panic would get him killed, and a calm, level head would see him safely through anything. The roll of twine was pinned against his lower back and the wall beside the door. Something tugged the line, pulling it tight, and then the rough cord bit into the tender flesh of his side. The tension dropped. He took the ball of twine in hand, set down the lantern, and was turning the axe blade to cut the cord when it pulled tight again. He held it. Something was testing the line the way a fish would test the line before taking the bait. Only, he didn't want the thing out there to take the bait. The only thing tied to the end of the line was him. The axe handle was too long, and with his hands still through the loop, he couldn't maneuver it to do the job. He had to prop the axe against the wall and take out his hand. As he bent to grasp the handle farther down, the line pulled tight again. Heart racing, he grabbed the axe, but the follow-up yank on the line caught him off balance, and he crashed into the door. The ball of twine spun in his hand, and the shriek came again. Letting go of the ball, he fished out his lighter and set flame to the knot at the front of his makeshift belt. The cord fell to the floor and immediately spun toward the door, caught, and the line snapped. He stood in the dark, afraid to move. The last shriek had been just outside the locked door. Through the small diamond-shaped window, he saw a faint, greenish glow that changed to yellow and then back to green. As it passed the door, he tiptoed and got a decent look at the thing. At first, he thought it was walking back toward him. Then he realized that it had two heads. Two very human-looking heads. One faced front and the other faced back. It turned sideways to look into an open doorway, and he saw the heads were fused together. His jaw went slack and a low humming droned through his head. The creature had two sets of arms, fully articulated, human-looking and very long. The first set extended from shoulders at the top of his torso exactly where a human's shoulders would be. The second set of shoulders sprouted from its sides at the bottom of the ribs. The long reptilian tail reached several feet behind it and seemed to float mere inches above the floor, moving back and forth, reminding him of the snake's movement as it watched the flame of his lantern. The greenish-yellowish glow seemed to be coming from just under the skin. Lines ran between joints connecting them with mutable colors. The face that searched the hallway in his direction was also in constant motion, as if myriad emotions played around with the expression, never settling. At the distance, the eyes looked only like black voids amidst pallid flesh. He couldn't move without the risk of it seeing him. When it stood straight, he gauged the height to be no less than 8 feet. The hands were tipped with very long, black, shiny nails. Its feet looked like a man's feet, except they only had 3 large toes protruding. The scurrying sounds of claws had to have come from the hands of the monster. He had no doubt that it could run like an alligator, using its deformed feet and 2 sets of muscular arms. The image of that in his brain was somehow more terrifying than what he was looking at through the window.